It is a brisk winter's morning. The trees are barren and sway in the wind as if to shiver. The sun hides away, and there is ice crackling beneath the scurry of the creatures. A hunter leaves the warmth of his home and enters the wilderness with hopes to bring an end to his hunger. But the snow begins to fall heavily, and the forest is all shadows. Soon the hunter becomes hopelessly lost. As time passes, he grows ferociously hungry and then manic. His body is gaunt now, his skin pulled tightly over his cheekbones. Then he hears a whistle. It is a small child not very far away. The hunger pangs fill the hunter with an uncontrollable urge, the urge to eat the child. And so the whistling comes to an abrupt end. Beware the Windigo, a cannibalistic monster with an insatiable hunger, who stalks children who wander too far away from their homes. If you are not careful, you too might get lost and suffer the same fate as the Windigo. Or you may be one of the flesh eater's snacks. This rendition of the Windigo's origin story has been shared many times in many circles among Canada's Indigenous First Peoples. It is a story that warns children of the dangers of straying too far from their community. As well, it teaches children of humanity's potential for brutality and selfishness. Through stories like these, people learn life lessons for safety, for standards and moral social behavior, for growing their understanding of things like friendship, faith, and love. Today, we come across stories told at bedtime after a long day, around the campfire with friends, or across dinner tables. We're also bombarded with severe stories through mainstream media and binge-worthy storylines on streaming platforms like Netflix. But once upon a time, the practice of oral storytelling dominated as the oldest form of teaching and learning. The tradition of oral storytelling in Indigenous culture connects the speaker and listener in communal experience. Stories convey values, beliefs, attitudes, and social norms, which in turn shape our perceptions of reality. My most vivid memory of a teacher using story for instructional purposes was in a lesson on perseverance. The teacher shared their story with applying to a competitive college program, but failing time and time again, rejected by multiple schools years in a row on a winding and emotional path of disappointment. But then, 1 year in the mail, they finally got that acceptance letter. This story arc built a framework which was positive, inspiring, and gave me pause to reflect. The path to success may be difficult, but it makes it all the more worthwhile when you get there. I came upon the value of storytelling as teaching practice through my teaching experience and research on Canadian Indigenous student success in the Academy. My teaching philosophy is in support of the public purposes of education. I understand my role is to produce meaningful learning experiences, and I maintain a strong service ethos. As such, I'm studying the achievement gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students in Canada in response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 Calls to Action report, which expressed an urgent need for Canada's education leaders to support reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. According to Mary Clea and Jean Shaw at the University of Mississippi, storytelling enhances children's development of language and logic skills. The literature shows that framing information in a narrative vignette connects the student to the content much more intimately, and as they become engrossed, they learn. According to Robert Coles, professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, stories improve the learner's ability for recall, application, and understanding of concepts, and engagement with the content. Stories are a sort of cognitive experiment where we can listen and simulate real-world problems, strategies, and social situations. They can transport you to another place and time with all the emotions and sensations that go along with it. According to Dr. Michelle Pidgeon of Simon Fraser University, Indigenous students have much lower educational attainment compared to non-Indigenous students, where post-secondary attainment is only 8% for Indigenous students, compared to 20% of the rest of Canada. Indigenous worldviews, their histories, culture, languages, are not adequately represented in Western academic textbooks, curriculum, or student services on campus. The cultural dissonance is very apparent. The Government of Ontario states, our schools should be places where students not only learn about diversity, but experience it. We know that when students see themselves reflected in their studies, they are more likely to stay engaged and find school relevant. We must consider the range of cultural literacy in our classrooms, that is, the assumed knowledge of traditions, languages, or history of any particular group of people. There is a growing awareness and momentum around the inequities facing the diversity of students navigating Canada's education system. Canadians are calling on all stakeholders, educators, administrators, policymakers, students, to critically examine the education system built on Euro-colonial ideologies. What perspectives are missing in our textbooks? Where are the gaps to embed new and different stories? And how can we better prepare students to be successful in an increasingly culturally diverse world? Educators are making efforts to bring indigeneity to curriculum through the integration of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit stories. We must come to learn the story of Canada's history with Indigenous peoples from the Indigenous worldview and acknowledge oral perspectives as legitimate history. The passing on of stories from one generation to the next are not only important for learning life lessons, but also act as tools for cultural and historical preservation of a nation. Sharing Indigenous stories and their worldviews is important for Indigenous students to develop a positive identity and self-worth. In a wide range of professional and personal contexts, stories can be used to inspire, teach, clarify, and mobilize. They are powerful tools for advocacy. Stories can persuade and move people into action and build investment in an issue. Certainly, we need look no further than mainstream and social media. We are bombarded with notifications on our cell phone where all sorts of people, all these voices, all sorts of stories are trying to reach us. You only need to watch 2 news programs back to back to see how the same story can be twisted and told, revealing the storyteller's motives. Today we face the problem of fake news, a term used to describe the disinformation and untrustworthiness of a story. In some forums, the cloak of anonymity emboldens people to share deeply personal and difficult stories as well. Mainstream and social media platforms, our law enforcement, and our government are all struggling with how to maintain integrity and regulate these spaces. Well, you may be asking yourself at this point, how then can you engage with stories in meaningful ways? Stories help to build a framework for how we understand our place in society and in the world. Indigenous scholar Dr. Joanne Archibald coined the term story work, referring to the applicability of Indigenous oral tradition in education. Archibald describes the role of both the storyteller and the listener, who work in unison to create meaning. She was taught by First Nation elders that listening requires the involvement of the auditory and visual senses, the emotions, the mind, and patience. While the listener must ensure that they are actively listening in these ways, the storyteller has the responsibility of selecting the appropriate story to tell and using their own discretion. This process provides an ideal platform for building allyship and empathy for cultural difference through the collaborative work of storyteller and listener. So this is my thought. Engaging with stories must be done with care and proper guidance. Tell stories responsibly and listen mindfully. Oral storytelling as a learning tool helps students acquire cultural and cross-cultural understandings. In a country as diverse as Canada, it is important to share the narratives of all peoples, their histories, struggles, and experiences. We need to hear all stories because when we are blind or ignorant to the experiences of other people, then we also don't see the need for improvement and change. Thank you.